Hello and welcome to our webcast for February 1st, 2019. Yes. My name is Christian Debré and this is Amy Hasbrook, the director of Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet.
Hello.
Also joining us just right there, okay, this is Taylor Ayotte, our director, our outreach coordinator and policy analyst. Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet is a non-religious organization by and for people with disabilities and our allies. Our goal is to inform, unify, and give voice to the disability rights opposition to assisted suicide, euthanasia, and other ending of life practices that discriminates against people with disabilities. Today's topic, the CCA report, which is a
Council of Canadian Academies.
Something About Us Without Us, Part 3. And
mature minors.
Mature minors.
Right.
Okay.
So today we're continuing our series on the Council of Canadian Academies reports with the document on mature minors. There are two elephants in the living room that we believe lower the value of this report. Last time we talked about pigs. Today we're talking about elephants.
Yeah.
And at least we have no cats.
Right. No cats. The report does not address the problem of suicide and risky behavior causing accidental death among teenagers, and abuse and mercy killing of disabled children are ignored. So both of these issues, the fact that kids are notorious for risky behavior and they have higher suicide rates. And in fact, we'll talk about that in a second, but also the fact that they didn't deal at all with the mercy killing issue, regardless of the Latimer case. And that is an important issue, I think. And they're going to say, well, no, because it's not the same as requests for assisted suicide, but it's connected. And we know it's connected because it comes from the same root, which is the idea that life with a disability is a fate worse than death. And when that is applied to the best interest standard of children, that's where it comes in. But of course, they didn't think that was connected. Okay, anyway, teenage suicide and risky behavior are a well-documented problem. This is mentioned in the context of Indigenous communities experiencing youth suicide crisis on page 29.
Yeah, but the rest of the report doesn't look at it.
Right.
Whatever.
Right. And on page 92, the report does have a chart showing that accidents and suicide are the leading cause of death among adolescents 15 to 19 years old. And that includes 26% die by suicide or self-harm.
But we don't use those statistics to do anything with.
Right. We're just going to put the chart in here and leave it alone. And 33% die by accidents, which a lot of them are car accidents. That's nearly 60% of adolescent deaths that can be tied to risky behavior and risky and self-destructive behavior.
And yet, teenagers,
right,
whatever they are, handicapped or not, are teenagers.
Right. Yet the report does not discuss these factors in the context of end-of-life decision-making, except to claim that medical assistance in dying is not an impulsive choice. So they say, yeah, there's all these deaths by accident and suicide, but it's not an impulsive choice. Okay. So
adolescents are not
impulsive. No,
it's very well known.
Right. Well, suicide isn't an impulsive choice. No, of course not. Or medical assistance in dying isn't an impulsive choice. Of course not. The other elephant in the room is the link between assisted suicide and euthanasia and mercy killing, where the belief that a disabled child is better off dead is put into action by parents who kill their children. We have a whole report on that on our website. You can go find it. It's, you know, parents who kill their kids like that are treated more leniently by the criminal justice system. So not only did the authors fail to discuss the homicide of Tracy Latimer by her father, they also ignored the public support he received for killing her and the devaluation of disabled lives signaled by that approval.
Remember the crowd outside the
court.
Yeah. It was really annoying.
Yeah. And basically they were all supporting his action of killing his child.
Right.
Because the child was disabled.
Yeah.
The 2016 case of Jerica Bolin was raised in the submission by Toujours Vivant, Not Dead Yet, because we believe it is a prime example of why adolescents are not in a position to make life or death decisions for themselves, and how society reacts inappropriately when disabled children ask to die. However, the working group chose not to discuss the Bolin case. So this is a case where a quote unquote mature minor asked to die and was given that wish, and yet they didn't discuss it. It seems a little odd to me. So Jerica was a 14-year-old girl with spinal muscular atrophy who had undergone multiple surgeries and, from reports, did not appear to have good pain management.
Oops. If I don't have good pain management,
right,
I will kill myself.
Right. I mean, a lot of people have said and done that because not having proper pain management is not okay. There was no inquiry into why she had had so many surgeries, because SMA is not something that generally requires a lot of surgeries, nor was there any inquiry as to why she had poor pain management. Okay. So she gained widespread public media attention for her fundraising campaign for a last dance before she had her ventilator turned off in order to die. Now, I have to make a correction because I got a note from Diane Coleman at Not Dead Yet, who pointed out that actually she didn't have a ventilator. She had a BiPAP machine that she used at night, sort of like Diane does. And what she did was she went into hospice to voluntarily stop eating and drinking and have palliative sedation while she starved to death. So that's what really happened. So that was definitely a continuous palliative sedation situation, basically a suicide. But of course, the Canadian working group, the Council of Canadian Academies, didn't see that as a case worth mentioning in their report. Her request shows the kind of immaturity adolescents are known for: strong emotional reactions, attention and reward-seeking behavior, and melodrama, in addition to her suicidal feelings. The public response to her campaign was nothing less than a crowd shouting, "Jump to a suicidal teenager on a high ledge."
I remember once I was in a traffic jam, a very big traffic jam caused by somebody tried to jump out of a bridge. And I remember that I tell to myself, jump, jump. Why? Because I was stuck somewhere. Yes.
Yeah.
And most people have this same kind of feeling, but it's not the right way to think.
Right. Okay, so the working group observed that young people, their parents, and doctors usually cooperate to make medical decisions. And that quote is from page 35. However, this is at odds with the finding of the Canadian Pediatric Society that, quote, parental requests for medical assistance in dying for their children outnumber requests by minors themselves by 5 to 1.
5 times, not 10% more, 25% more.
Right.
5 times, 500% more.
Right. And that's on page 120. Now, this statistic appears in a section that's entitled, "The number of made requests by mature minors is likely to be small." So wait a minute. They're trying to say, don't worry, be happy.
Yeah.
You know, experts agree everything is fine, but what they're saying, in fact, is that parents are asking for euthanasia more than kids are. There's something wrong there. That's kind of
Tout va très bien, Madame la Marquise.
Ouais, exactement. The report doesn't question the assumption that parents do everything possible to save their children, which they repeat a couple of times on page 142 and 151, despite evidence to the contrary. So, okay, the working group distinguishes between age cutoffs in non-medical contexts, such as voting, driving, smoking, and using alcohol, from medical decision-making. And they claim that unlike in the non-medical contexts, denying someone the ability to make healthcare decisions has potential implications for their bodily integrity. Yet wouldn't smoking, driving, and using alcohol all have an impact on the bodily integrity, not only of the person, but of others around them as well? And that's all on page 38. You can look it up. It, you know, when you see stuff like that, it just makes you wonder. They spent an awful lot of time on this report, but it feels like they were lacking some common sense. And I don't know, maybe it's just me. It might just be me.
Nope, I think exactly the same as you.
As we've talked about before, to have legal capacity, a person must be able to understand and appreciate the information about a particular decision and the consequences of each possible choice.
And it is exactly why that army used youngsters to go to war, because they couldn't.
Right, why the army? Because kids don't have those capacities. However, this standard was created for, you know, the decision-making standard was created to govern health care decisions, like whether to have a tumor or a whole breast removed, not the choice of whether to live or die. That is a completely other choice, and there has never been a standard established for making that decision, what competence, what capacity you really need to make that decision. Other than in the suicide prevention context, that, you know, somebody is, you know, not, has depression or some other mental illness that is causing them to have thoughts of suicide. And that is assumed to be a problem. But in the context of assisted suicide, I guess it's not. Also, these are functions related to thinking that don't take into account the emotional and judgment factors that affect teenagers. So we're trying to come up with this idea of a mature teenager, but they're only talking about the cognitive function, not the emotional or judgment factors.
You know, there is no effect of that over the decision of the adolescent.
Right.
You're sure of that.
Right. Okay. There is no universally accepted definition of a mature minor. Canadian common law, healthcare statutes, and policy generally view a mature minor as a person aged 12 to 18 with the capacity to make an informed healthcare decision and the ability to act voluntarily with respect to that decision. That's on page 36. The factors to be considered by courts in deciding if a child can make a decision include the minor's understanding and appreciation of what is proposed, their ability to make a voluntary choice, and we'll talk about some of these things in a few minutes. The gravity of the treatment decision, so is it just whether or not to have a tumor or a whole organ removed, or is it life or death? The side effects of the treatment, whether the treatment will save the person's life, what alternatives are available, whether there is a provincial or territorial health care consent statute or child welfare law that applies, and legal standards such as the best interest of the child and parents patriae, which is where the state steps in to take over for the parents who aren't doing their job.
Yeah.
So those are some of the things they look at. What does voluntary mean as it relates to decisions taken by disabled teenagers? The report rightly notes that adolescents are generally dependent on their parents for food, shelter, clothing, transportation, and recreation allowances. Yep, got it. But the thing is that the report doesn't discuss that ill and disabled teenagers may be much more dependent on their parents, siblings, and others for help with personal care, like transfers from bed to wheelchair, toileting, dressing, bathing, eating, household chores, which either they can't do or they need help with, and other daily activities, medical and therapy appointments, tons of those, maintenance of prostheses and medical devices, negotiating with schools over education plans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I remember needing a lot of support from my brothers and sisters. If I dropped a contact lens, I could not see it. I needed somebody. If I couldn't find it within the first 5 minutes, I needed help for somebody to come and find it for me.
So there is a lot of dependence.
Right, exactly. Such a high level such a high level of dependence will affect the child's ability to assert their independence and making any kind of decision, let alone if they feel they are a burden on their family.
It's really hard to develop a basic trust in yourself when your loved ones are more comfortable with acting for you. It sets a really horrible baseline, because if the people who are supposed to love you and care about you most, at least at that time in your life, don't believe that you can hold your own, and you're already starting to know that the rest of the world is indifferent at best, how are you supposed to function?
Right. And oftentimes, I remember once when I was a teenager, I got really hung up on a silly little thing about what socks I would wear. And, you know, fortunately for me, I could choose my socks and put them on. But it was my hormones acting up and, you know, making me have a hard time making a decision that was
teenagers have hormones. Oh, what the news!
Right. So, you know, this was a crisis for me, even though it was nothing. And I can imagine that anybody who is dependent and for whom the parents choose the clothes they're going to wear, because it's just as easy since they're going to get them dressed anyway. You know, the kid doesn't get to decide what they're going to wear. It can turn into a crisis. I get that, how that can happen. The authors apparently don't get that.
Show me a parent and I will show you something like that.
Right. Okay, so what does it mean when we talk about the best interest of the child? Is this standard defined by a medical model? Is it defined by parents who may not have adequate supports? Is it defined according to a discriminatory view of the quality of life with a disability? Is it defined by the people who say that Tracy Latimer is better off dead? Because that's what it comes down to, and why it is so unprofessional and negligent on the part of the authors to not deal with that issue in this report. Or, as we wish, is it defined by people who live well with that disability and have the services and supports they need to participate on an equal basis in their communities? What an idea.
Yeah.
Okay. So,
have you seen it a lot?
Well, I mean, there are people who do, well, first of all, not a lot of teenagers are emancipated. So that doesn't happen a lot for teenagers, but, and that's not generally how people consider the best interest of children. They don't think of disabled people who live independently and successfully in the community. They think of Tracy Latimer. And so that's the problem, because that's where people are going when they think best interest of the child. And it's
yeah, or they think of someone who's going to live at home for the rest of their life. They can't possibly envision what services are out there.
Right, right. And anybody who for some reason can't speak, they assume the person has a cognitive disability and, of course, could never, ever live independently if they had a cognitive disability. Oh, no. It's just... Okay. All right. The report presents studies showing that adolescents have the intellectual ability to make medical decisions, but that other brain functions related to decision making take longer to develop, and adolescents and young adults have problems with certain things like impulse control and risk-taking behavior. No, yeah, you think? Strong emotional reactions, increased reward-seeking behavior, and self-stimulating behavior, drugs, complex decision-making processes, planning ahead, weighing risks and benefits, and that they have trouble with suicidal thoughts and feelings and self-harming behaviors. Right.
Yeah.
And yes, they do talk about that, but they don't use
it. They don't look at it at all.
Right.
They don't use it. They have some show off, and that's it.
So what is maturity? Because they talk about that question a little bit. The report cites court cases that mention different indicators, such as an understanding that death is permanent and not just going to sleep.
Not the same thing.
Except a lot of grown-ups have trouble with that concept.
Yeah.
So that's just an adolescent thing. Experience with making decisions, but overprotected disabled people may have been deprived of opportunities to practice in decision making. If your parents get you dressed every morning and they pick out what your clothes you're going to wear, you've missed an opportunity to make decisions that other kids make. It's worth asking, is maturity the same as complying with the family's or society's expectations of what a disabled or terminally ill person would want?
Knowing yourself and being able to speak up for yourself are really important here. One really concrete way that I've seen that come up is the binary between using a wheelchair and any other device. I've had so many people say that I'm getting better when they see me switch between devices, or that they're worried about a sudden loss of strength. Yeah, I'll keep using my legs whenever possible, but looking closer to normal is not at the top of my to-do list. Being able to function well is. I can go without my legs for a few days, but not my hands, as my walker would allow.
Yes, exactly. And I had the same... a friend of mine who has CP and walked got a wheelchair, and she's like, wow, this is so liberating. I can go fast. This is so much easier. This is so much less wear and tear on my body. Oh my God. She was so cool.
But nobody believed her, right? Because she didn't look like everyone else anymore.
Well, I mean, we believed her because we were all grown-ups with disabilities.
Okay, so...
But other people, yeah, I mean, it was the...
Yeah, other non...
Not walking, you're not,
Yeah.
Right. And the thing about when I was a kid, I had to go through all these painful visual things with my eyes. And, I was expected to be quiet and not move and not complain. And that, that compliance was considered mature behavior. So, that is, yeah, okay.
Right, because when you get to be a big girl, you don't freak out about how much pain you're in or whatever.
Exactly. So, whereas in fact, mature reaction to painful stimuli would be say, excuse me, this is painful. We need to figure out something else.
Yeah.
Right. On page 47, the report refers to the proposed treatment, but suicide and euthanasia are not supposed to be proposed by anybody except the person who will die.
Yeah.
and not by doctors and not by parents. And okay, section 4.3.2 is entitled Evaluating the Maturity of Minors adds a layer of security that is not typically invoked for adults. But it seems to us that this is a level of scrutiny that should be used for everyone, regardless of age. Remember, we were talking about people who think that dying is like going to sleep. It is not. In fact, even the plaintiffs in the Carter case had originally imagined a tougher assessment process that would have than we have now, including a mandatory psychiatric evaluation with eligibility determined by a 3-person expert panel. So they, when the plaintiffs originally brought the case, they thought the safeguards would be much more strict than we have. And we have a citation to the first Carter decision there with that information. On page 87, the report claims to have shown that autonomous healthcare decision-making can incorporate the relationships of young patients with their parents, guardians, and others who are significant to them. And that would be great if it were true. But unfortunately, the report fails to factor in the effects of disability discrimination on the person and their relationships with family and medical staff. And remember, it's not just, the current thing. In my situation, my parents were very unhappy about my disability, but because for me, my disability was who and what I was, I took that as they didn't like me, and there were other reasons to believe my parents were very unhappy, and it had a huge impact on my self-esteem, and that's going to happen to kids with disabilities. They can't separate their disabilities from themselves, and it's going to affect their self-esteem and their ability to assert themselves and value themselves is going to be affected. Also, this assertion does little to acknowledge and guard against negative attitudes about disability and abuse of disabled people. And finally, it discounts the emotional and developmental issues that affect the decision-making abilities of young people.
There was one court case mentioned in there. Can I recall any of the specifics? No, but I can tell you that the young man in question was far too influenced by his father.
Yes.
So they pull that out in that case, but not in a life or death situation.
Right. And it's interesting because in the case they cite as most important, the AC case, the court decided that children should have the right to make these decisions. But in that case, they decided that the court never evaluated the child's ability to make their own decisions, so it doesn't count that time. And so they're trying to sort of have their cake and eat it too. They're saying, yeah, we believe in this, but not for this person because this technicality. Okay, in our overview of the reports, we talked about the consequences of excluding disabled people, from the working group that examined the evidence and debated the issue. Though the Mature Minors report did acknowledge this lack on page 152 and include interviews with 3, quote, youth leaders on page 122 and 123, the lack of disability input affects the content of the report, and here are some ways. The report rightly recognizes First Nation members' mistrust of the medical community, while saying little about the very good reasons that disabled people are wary of the healthcare system. And
yes, we are.
We've talked about that at other times, but yes, there are a lot of reasons for disabled people to be wary.
And one of the first is because it is dangerous.
Right. Because people think, why would they want to live? The report properly highlights the long-term impact of abuse of Indigenous people in residential schools, while saying little about the potential effects of abuse of disabled people, both in institutional settings and in their families of origin. And we know that people with disabilities are much more vulnerable and more likely to be abused than non-disabled kids. Also, the authors failed to note the importance of the fact that 2 of the 3 Belgian cases of mature minors that they cited were killed in the last 3 years, had chronic disabilities. One had muscular dystrophy and the other had cystic fibrosis. So 2/3 of those 3 cases had long-term disabilities from birth, in fact. And so, you know, again, they're kind of ignoring what's right in front of them. The working group ignores the impact of disability discrimination on creating the conditions that lead to requests for assisted suicide and euthanasia. The statement to the effect that disability should be understood as an interplay between the person's impairments and the physical and social accommodations available in their environment, which is repeated twice on page 126 and 148, doesn't take prejudice and discrimination into account. And it's, anyway, I
No
can't say
comment.
enough.
No
No comment.
Yeah.
Yeah, the report doesn't raise the possibility that depression or other mental illness may co-occur with disability or terminal illness as an impetus for assisted suicide or euthanasia request. Nor does the report acknowledge the external origin of emotional problems caused by oppression. So they don't talk about peer pressure to conform to a non-disabled norm. And I really got hit by that one. Physical and sexual abuse, devaluation causing low self-esteem, overprotection.
Yeah.
That wasn't my issue.
Yeah.
Low expectations, bullying, feelings of powerlessness in the face of painful and invasive medical procedures, and isolated from peers and siblings, feeling so different and not understanding why. Okay, the Mature Minors Report advocates the rights of children to participate in making decisions that affect their lives without taking into account the internal and external factors that can impair that process. It's not that we don't feel like kids should be participating, it's that they need to take into account what's really going on. As in the other reports, the working group is basing their analysis on a best case scenario, whereas in the real world, children with degenerative illness and disability may be making such decisions under the influence of high levels of dependence, physical and emotional abuse, the impact of negative views of disability on their self-esteem, the stress of isolation and painful medical procedures, peer pressure and bullying, and the ordinary developmental difficulties of adolescence. That is a lot. Is it wise to base life-ending policy on a best-case scenario that may, in fact, only occur rarely? Can we really say that a child subject to these pressures, regardless of how solemn, compliant, or mature they may appear, is making a free and informed and voluntary choice? Isn't it our duty as a society to recognize and solve the problems facing adolescents and their families, rather than pretending that ill and disabled children are universally loved and treasured by parents who have the supports they need to care for all of their children? Taylor?
And 2 things. One, what about things like overprotection being rooted in love, but love aimed the wrong way?
Yes.
Second, there's a graphic I've seen going around, a script of a conversation, and one person says, "Wow, you seem really mature for your age." And the second one goes, "Thanks, it's all the trauma."
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So I don't know about you, but I can relate to that one.
Yeah,
and what can we do to make the difference between a grave demeanor and compliance and maturity more obvious?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, lots of kids who have gone through this stuff do appear mature, but does that mean that they have the opportunity and they have what they need to make an informed and clear and voluntary decision?
Free decision.
Free decision? No.
Yeah. And if you're, man, how do I put this? If you're as mature as people around you say you are you being given the opportunity to act like it?
Yeah.
Decision-making opportunities in accordance with your age, opportunities to go out and experience life without people hovering over you.
Right. Yeah. I mean, one thing I remember when I went off to college, I was scared to death. I thought, oh my God, if the outside world is worse than home, it's going to be awful. And I was stunned at how easy everything was. Nobody was screaming at you all the time. It's amazing how it is. So
I mean that wasn't what my home was like, but I had also felt relief too. Nobody's hovering over me. Nobody's wondering, where I'm at all the time and trying to hold my hand.
Right. I can make my own mistakes, and I deal with the consequences of those mistakes. Yippee!
Yeah. It's still, I mean, I've been moved away from home for nearly 10 years, and sometimes very small things continue to blow my mind. I'm going to get on a bus and go get my own groceries tomorrow, and that is a huge deal.
Yeah. Yep. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you want more information about the subjects that we discuss here, you can visit our Facebook page at facebook.com/toujours vivant, not dead yet. You can visit our website at tvndy.ca. Email us at info@tv-ndy.ca, or you can follow us on Twitter @TVNDY. Thanks to Christian for helping out.
Thank you, Amy.
And thanks to Taylor for your contributions.
Thank you, Taylor.
We will see you next time. Bye.
Take care, everybody. Bye.